Today we're going to talk about how God called Samuel. This is a wonderful story and a favourite for many people. Just to recap, Hannah, his mother, was married to Elkanah, and they're on their way to Shiloh once a year. And God had shut Hannah's womb, and for many years she could not have a child, and she prayed earnestly every day that God would open her womb and allow her to have a baby. And of course, through marriage, God answered her prayer, and she had a son called Samuel, which means ask of God. And she promised, remember, that if God gave her a little boy, she would give him back to the Lord so that he could serve the Lord. And so she did. Samuel was born, and after 5 or 6 years, she brought him back to the temple, and here he's given to the priest, to Eli, to be able to work in the temple with his 2 sons and help the general running of the temple, to serve the Lord in the temple. But even as a little boy, even though he went about and he worked, he helped, he cooked, he cleaned, he introduced himself to the people, helped the people, he looked like a Christian, acted like a Christian, served like a Christian, the Bible says Samuel did not yet know the Lord. And that's very interesting, because quite often we can look at people and say, that person's definitely a Christian. But no matter how good you are, even if you look like a Christian, it does not make you a Christian. Everyone who is a Christian must call upon the name of the Lord personally and individually, ask the Lord to save them. It's an individual thing before the Lord. But Samuel did not yet know the Lord, the Bible says. But the problem was, Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they were, even though they dressed nice, they looked smart, they looked handsome, they were wicked men. And the Bible tells us a list of things, what they done to the people and said to the people, brought disgrace to the house of God, to the temple. In fact, people were afraid to come to the temple because they seen these 2 men and what they would do to them and say to them. And God was angry, and God was offended, and God sent a prophet to speak to Eli. And God spoke to him through his word, and he still never got the message. Eli was far too lenient with his children. So God uses a little boy, Samuel. And one night, whenever Samuel was sleeping, God calls, Samuel! Samuel! And Samuel jumps up and runs to Eli and says, Eli, yes, did you call me? No, Samuel, I never called you. Go back to bed. He goes back to bed. Samuel! Samuel! The voice of the Lord comes again, and he gets up and he runs to Eli. Eli, I'm trying to sleep. Why do you keep calling me? I never called you. Go back to sleep. There was nobody else there. He goes back to sleep and falls asleep for the 3rd time. Samuel! Samuel! And he jumps out of his bed and he runs to Eli and he says, Eli, why are you keep calling me? Why do you keep calling me? It's the middle of the night. I'm trying to sleep and I'm tired. And Eli said, Samuel, I never called you. And Samuel, Eli being the man of God he was, realized that someone higher was speaking to him. And he said to Samuel, Samuel, that's God speaking to you. And the next time you hear that voice, Samuel, you say, speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Notice Samuel is an obedient child. When Eli called him, he didn't shout what or yell. He got out of his bed and he went every single time he was called. Sometimes when you're called, your mum calls you, she wants your attention. Do you just shout and gulder or even give off? That's not the way Samuel done. Every time he was spoken to, he got out of his bed and he went. But now something different's going to happen. And that night, whenever God called Samuel, just after this, the Bible says, and Samuel grew and the Lord was with him. So I believe that was the very night in his bed, in his bedroom, that was the night he called upon the name of the Lord and the Lord saved him. Do you know most people, most children, that's when the Lord saves them, in their beds at night time, when they're just alone or with their parents, their mum, and they're reading, they're praying, they're thinking about God. They realize they're not saved, realize they're not a Christian. Maybe they realize they're good children, but like Samuel, they did not yet know the Lord. Well, that night Samuel prayed, and that was the night God came into his heart and saved him, because from then on, as Samuel grew, the Lord was with him. And that's very, 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 very important. And do you know what God said to Samuel? Samuel, tell Eli tomorrow morning, tell him on the same day both his sons are going to die, and on the same day there's no longer going to be an old man in the house. How could Samuel tell such a thing to old Eli? But see, the next day, whenever Samuel met with Eli, he had to tell him the whole truth. Eli said, Samuel, don't hide from me. Tell me everything God told you. And Eli brought Samuel, and Samuel stood before him. And he said, God told me to tell you, on the same day, both your sons are going to die, and there'll no longer be an old man in the house. Not long after this, here a war broke out, and both Eli's sons were in the battle, and both of them were killed on the battlefield on the same day. The news was brought back to Eli in the temple, and Eli was a big, heavy man, a fat man, about 98 years of age, and he was so shocked of the news that was brought to him that his sons both died. The Bible says he fell off the back of his chair and he broke his neck and he died. Therefore, remember what God said to Samuel? To tell Eli, on the same day, both your sons will die and there'll no longer be an old man in the house. And that's exactly what happened. So the Bible says, your sin will find you out. Both these boys were wicked, and God eventually removed them, not only of the temple, but from life altogether. Samuel grew up to be a wonderful man of God. Samuel grew up to be a prophet, the last judge in Israel. And he was the man who was used to get David, to anoint David, to say, David, you're going to be the next king of Israel. David, who was a man after God's own heart. Samuel lived a wonderful life, but could hardly find much fault with him, because he was a man from his early days as a little boy, loved the Lord and served the Lord every day of his life. I challenge every one of us to be like Samuel.